Hello, protocols, packets, and programs. I realize it's been a while since we've asked, Conan, what is best in DevOps? To clash your memories, to see control flows before you, and to have the sanitations of their pointer. Which means, this week we chat with Daniel Krivelevich from Cider Security about enumerating CI/CD risks and educating developers about them. In the news segment, Azure's Cosmos flaw, Pixel's lock screen bypass, NSA's advice on C, egress filtering, code review styles, and more. Contemplate this, and stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. It's the show to learn the latest tools, techniques, and processes necessary to understand DevOps, application security, and cloud security. Your trusted source for the latest application security news. It's time for Application Security Weekly.
Securing the modern enterprise requires insights into massive amounts of data. NVIDIA Morpheus harnesses the power of AI and GPU computing to help protect networks in a way never before possible, enabling 100% data visibility to provide cybersecurity analysts the tools to identify, capture, and act on threats and anomalies. Sign up for a free 1-hour NVIDIA Deep Learning Institute course. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/NVIDIA. UFOs are everywhere. That's right. UFOs, unidentified file objects, are hiding in files in your cloud apps and storage. UFOs can contain malware that exfiltrates data or deploys ransomware. 70% of UFOs in files can't be detected or prevented by traditional scanning solutions like antivirus and sandboxing. That's where Vatiro comes in. Vatiro prevents UFOs before they hitch a ride in on files in the cloud, without detection and without slowing down business. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Vatiro. This is episode 220, recorded November 14th, 2022. I'm your host, Mike Shima, and I'm here with John Kinsella. Hello, John.
Mike, I'm here to pump up some application security.
There we go. Let's get everybody pumped up. We unfortunately don't have Akira Brand with us this week. She's a little bit under the weather, but we hope to see you next week. Get better, Akira. And for everyone who's listening, don't forget to check out our library of on-demand webcasts and technical trainings at securityweekly.com/on-demand. Daniel Krivelevich is a veteran cybersecurity industry expert and problem solver with over 13 years of enterprise security experience. He has a proven track record working with over 100 enterprises across multiple industries with a strong orientation to application and cloud security. Having led application and cloud security at Signia for nearly 4 years, Daniel's passionate about finding and developing the right technologies and processes to secure organizations with a focus on identifying and protecting crown jewels and key assets to stay ahead of the threat landscape. Hello, Daniel. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
We love having you on because part of your background sounds like, some of the things that stand out as I'm reading that is finding the right solutions. I think finding the right solutions also stems from understanding what the real problems are. Now, I'm going to give away a little bit of foreshadowing here. We're going to get into a top 10 list. But before we talk about that top 10 list, tell us about CI/CD security and what were the problems that you saw that brought you to this point?
Yeah. So I think my entire career was spent in the enterprise security domain and within this relationship between security and engineers. After serving like many Israelis in 8200, I did some years doing penetration tests, trying to hack into web applications, handing the reports to the organization for fixing them. Then moving to the other side of being the entity that receives the reports, working in live person leading the application security program, and then working as a consultant in Signia with, like you said, hundreds of organizations, building their application security program. And I saw that over time, the task of application security, securing the engineering ecosystem, has become more complex. It was always the reality that the engineering ecosystem or the challenges that engineering processes present have to do with securing the code, securing whatever is being sent to production, making sure that we don't have security flaws or security misconfigurations being sent to production and that developers write secure code. That's always been the challenge. And that challenge was has been transformed and amplified over the course of the last 2, 3, 4 years, because there are many more development languages, many more development frameworks. Code gets to production a lot faster, and security kind of shifts from being a blocker, being this entity that has the luxury of saying everything has to go through me before it gets to production, to being a guardrail, to finding ways to keep up with engineering. And so the challenge of preventing security flaws, security misconfigurations from getting to production is much more complex now. But then over the last, let's say 2, 3, 4 years, there is a new flavor of challenges that also falls within the scope of responsibility of the Appsec practitioner, and that is securing the CI/CD ecosystems, not thinking in any way about what flows through the CI/CD processes, but rather what is the security posture of the systems and processes within the CI/CD ecosystem, and what are the different ways through which an attacker can abuse them. Obviously, in this regard, SolarWinds is always given as a great example. SolarWinds, to many people, is a great example of why you should be concerned about your supply chain. What happens if one of your third parties gets compromised? Because 18,000 organizations had malware shipped to them because SolarWinds was compromised. But people tend to forget that this began with the fact that SolarWinds had their CI system compromised and used to spread that malware. And then there are numerous new flavors or categories of attack vectors which abuse the CI/CD ecosystem and abuse the fact that typically the level of posture within the systems and processes that comprise the CI/CD is not sufficient. And so it's gradually becoming the path of least resistance. And again, this is a new type of challenge that is also within the scope of responsibility of the asset practitioner, only there is a lot less knowledge and technologies and solutions and methodologies around how to address this category of challenges. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, before we open up some of what those challenges are, I like how you're describing at the beginning that there's this shift from application, AppSec teams no longer have the luxury, as you said, of being gatekeepers. But I think we would agree that luxury is probably something that legitimately, for good reasons, should go away. It's not that type of blocking, being able to review every single release doesn't scale, doesn't necessarily make sense. The AppSec teams don't necessarily have all the context, but maybe they do understand what some of those challenges are. And here, maybe let's actually talk about some of the, how you brought together some of those, enumerated those challenges. Let's get into those top 10 CI/CD risks, and then maybe talk about some of that tooling too. Because, and maybe I'll set it up for you. Looking at this list, we have this in the show notes for listeners. I'll say at the beginning, Daniel, there's 2 or 3 that look familiar to me from an OWASP top 10. For example, identity and access management, insecure system configuration. This is sort of do you have an asset inventory? Are you brushing your teeth type of basic efforts that any AppSec team environment have. But you have a lot of really interesting things here that are more specific to CI/CD pipelines. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe it just makes sense to provide a little bit more of context about how the project was born, the top 10 CI/CD security risks. So I didn't we didn't talk about this, but the company that I founded, Cider Security, was born out of that pain or challenge of adapting to the modern engineering ecosystem and helping the AppSec practitioner address all of the challenges that fall under this umbrella of challenges, which is securing the engineering ecosystem, the old and the new. And we realized that securing the CI/CD ecosystem is something that doesn't require just technology. We are working on the technology, but it also requires a lot of knowledge. It requires the AppSec practitioner, and in many cases the DevOps practitioner, to become familiar with this new category of risks a new set of questions that they need to ask themselves on a day-to-day basis to make sure that their environment is not susceptible to those risks. And this is the motivation for us to compile this list of top 10 CI/CD security risks. It's a project that we worked on for about 9 or 10 months. It was authored by myself and Omer Gil, which is the head of research at Cider Security, and we worked together in collaboration with 15 Appsec experts from Netflix and from Atlassian and from many organizations in the world that deal with Appsec seriously on a day-to-day basis. We wanted to make sure that we have the widest and most relevant sphere of reference possible going into this, to make sure that that list that we're compiling is relevant to as many Appsec practitioners in as many verticals and levels of maturity as possible. What we did was basically fuse together insights from, one, analyzing many blogs and articles and analysis of the anatomy of various flaws and hacks and attacks that had happened in the CI/CD ecosystem, like SolarWinds, like many other breaches, together with CI/CD environments, real CI/CD environments that we had analyzed, dozens and dozens of real environments, real organizations, real pains, real challenges, and of course all these discussions that we had with those industry experts to get their insights, fused all that together to compile that list of the top 10 CI/CD security risks. And then, like you said, some of the risks are similar in their nature to the risks that exist in the OWASP top 10 web application security risks. And it makes sense, because at the end of the day, all security, email security, web application security, server security, Active Directory security, they all align to the same guiding principles. You have to maintain least privilege, you have to think about access controls, you have to maintain visibility, you have to have strong recovery capabilities. There are many similar guiding principles, only you need to be able to adapt them to the ecosystem and domain that you're operating in. So access controls is something that you need to think about in the context of CI/CD when you're thinking about who has permissions and access to the systems that comprise the CI/CD ecosystem. Which humans, which applications have which permissions to which system, what level of visibility do I have over that? So yeah, we have logging and visibility, and we have identity and access management, and we have all the typical security domains or risk categories that you could find in other similar lists, with an adaptation or contextualization to the CI/CD ecosystem. And then there are some risks that are unique to CI/CD, to the nature of engineering, to the nature of build process.
And I want to get those out. What I want to highlight too is that one of the things that's nice in reading through that list is that you have references to some of the attacks, references to what influenced some of those entries. And they're very attack-centric, I want to say, in the sense of this is what we saw in the past. You're talking about the groups that you were consulting with to put this together. It's not just a mapping of, here is some NIST standard, here's some other standard, and we've just reorganized a list of controls into this that may sound like, yeah, you have to do configuration, you have to do identity access management, but you have context-specific areas to say, oh, what if someone is manipulating the memory of source, on the build system, and that's how the attack is happening. So now that I interrupted your flow of thought there by putting some more context there, tell us about some of that engineering that is specific to the CI/CD pipeline that brings in this helpful context.
Yeah, this is a good point. I think it's also why it was important for us to begin with reading the anatomy of these attacks. We wanted to force ourselves to think like the attackers and to think about realistic attack scenarios, so that the list is going to be driven by threats and not by controls alone, by best practices. You want to know what's the motivation behind the controls that you're implementing. Otherwise, you're going to have a hard time making sure they're implemented properly and that they're effectively addressing the risks that you need to address. We have risk categories, which you probably won't find in other top 10 lists. For example, everything having to do with dependency chain abuse. Everybody knows dependency confusion and some of the events that had happened with Log4j, or the frequent compromises of popular JavaScript packages in NPM or Python packages. This happens on a very frequent basis. And then this is a new flavor of attacks that abuses the way packages are being fetched by developer workstations or by the CI environments themselves. At the end of the day, every single developer workstation or build environment fetches hundreds of thousands of packages, either directly referenced or indirectly referenced. And then compromise of one of those packages could lead to malicious code being executed on the environment. But this is something that is specific to the technical characteristics of how packages are fetched by different package managers, how build environments operate, how hardening processes are configured within the client fetching those dependencies. This is very much specific to the technical nature of how software is developed and how software is built.
So one of the things you're describing there is, I think, if, at least from my point of view, if I compare to modern CI/CD to, say, 10, 15 years ago, those guys, in a lot of cases, for those of us doing a little more modern, the current state of the art, it's become super complex. You've got your actions. I mean, even just going through the top 10 list, each one of these is like a separate piece which has been added in there with an end goal of making a, either a continuous delivery or some sort of a very cool sounding, and in some cases actually a very cool deployment model. But I guess where I'm going on, I'm sort of curious your thoughts around that is we know as an industry, as a security industry, as we add more complexity, it's just going to become harder to actually keep track of what balls are in the air. Does that resonate with you, or does it seem like it's getting better or worse from that point of view?
So to be honest, I think the situation is not improving right now, but we have a lot of room for optimism, because this is exactly...
That's why you're creating this, I mean.
Yes. Okay. Cider is doing a lot of interesting initiatives on that front, and many other entities are doing interesting initiatives on that front. And this is how this industry works. In every single vertical and domain, if you look at Active Directory security, where it was 10, 13, 15 years ago, it was the reality that it was adopted by the builders, and it was adopted very rapidly because it made the lives easier. And then attackers realized that this is happening, that this is a big part of the attack surface, and that they have a lot of new opportunities. And so it was the reality that, pretty much every single Active Directory environment 15 or 13 years ago, if you happened to land on a workstation, you would become domain admin within 5 minutes, undetected, and you could disrupt the environment to an extent that it ceases to exist and nobody would notice, or nobody would be able to prevent. And then what had happened is that defenders picked up, attackers started picking this up, more attackers started realizing how big the opportunity is, and so it became even a bigger Wild Wild West. So the situation deteriorated for a while, and then defenders understood this and started building technologies and knowledge on how to address this risk. And over time, the gaps between the builders and the breakers started to diminish to an extent that today it is very hard to compromise Active Directory environments, and the reality is very far from where it was 15 or 10 years ago. Same thing happened to cloud security about 7 or 8 years ago. It was a Wild Wild West in the beginning, and then the industry understood that attackers are taking advantage too much and going too far, and we closed the gap. And this is what's going to happen with CI/CD security.
That's a great point, especially... Oh, yeah,
I'm saying
bringing up... And I want to lean into that a little bit too, because as you were mentioning the cloud aspect, Amazon said, well, we're actually going to start, making it more difficult to have S3 buckets open by default, and we'll have some, very large alarms by that. Both GCP and Amazon said, SSRF, we're going to change how we handle our metadata services and throw some headers on their requirements so that SSRF can't get to it as easily. And where I'm going with that is that idea of responsibilities, because you were talking about developer laptops pulling in packages from everywhere. Do you see a trend, a movement? Should we be shifting more responsibility onto NPM, for example, to continue to push that, requiring MFA for their developers and doing inspection of these packages? Or is it the design pattern should be internally organizations are setting up their own artifactories, and some poor soul is actually going point by point through this package looks okay, this package looks okay, and then 1,000 packages later on a Friday afternoon, they just fall over dead because that's so boring. Where are the tools and processes that are missing here, and perhaps where should they go within developers, within the orgs, within the artifactories?
Yeah, so NPM is part of GitHub, and GitHub part of Microsoft.
All comes back to Microsoft.
I think that this is our responsibility as an industry, and specifically as vendors. Like, if you want people to use your product and you want to make money off of it, then you have to make sure that it's secure. And the industry is putting pressure on the vendors to make sure that whatever they're doing is secure. This is the natural balance of things, and this is why it's so important to spark those discussions around these topics, around where the risks lies, and this is why the top 10 CI/CD security risk framework and SALSA and a lot of these other frameworks are so important, because they dictate the trends in the industry. They dictate what vendors are being judged upon and what should be considered adequate from the perspective of security when you're evaluating a vendor. And so this is kind of the natural balance that is always preserved in the industry. And I think even if you compare where we are today in relation to where we are 3, 4, 8 years ago, there is a bigger pressure on vendors to be diligent about security and about products to be secure. And so I think we have a lot of room for optimism on that. And there are a lot more people, a lot more entities putting pressure on vendors, on vendors and on software providers to make sure that whatever they're doing is secure. And this is amplified by the likes of NIST and FedRAMP and other entities which are responsible for regulation and standards. Even the White House, which issued an executive order saying that every software organization must have an SBOM. And so this ensures that organizations will have an SBOM, and this ensures that vendors are going to build good SBOMs, and that there's going to be competition over who builds the best SBOM. And this is the measures that are required to get the industry to where it needs to get, sparking those discussions in the right places. And yeah, I think like I began to say earlier, top 10 CI/CD, other frameworks, they play a critical role in addition to the technologies and the solutions themselves, to making sure that the industry is headed to where it needs to be headed.
One of those aspects is, like with SBOM, I do like the idea of SBOM, and I think to get ahead of a part of an unhelpful tangent, having an SBOM doesn't mean you're secure. Having an SBOM means you knew how you built your software. I think maybe that's how I would describe it. One of the traps that the OWASP top 10 fell into for web applications was it devolved into organizations saying we adhere to the OWASP top 10 standard, or we're OWASP top 10 approved, or things like that. Now, purposefully, you haven't set this up like a similar standard, and that's a little bit out of your control, perhaps, how people are going to interpret it. But what I want to steer that question into is, from your perspective, or how would you like to see organizations demonstrate a maturity or be able to say their SBOM, you do have more confidence in the security perhaps of their practices or how they're doing. And maybe this ties into a little bit of salsa that you mentioned or something like that.
Yep.
Just getting into that idea of prove, what that you're doing something better to continue to give Daniel this optimism about the CI/CD future.
Yeah. So I think we're still very early, in the early days of maturing towards where we need to get. And there are still some unanswered questions as to what is the right direction. Like, we're still fine-tuning the exact angle at which we are directing our efforts. I think, yeah, Salsa is adopted by more and more organizations, and there are more and more standards today already. There's a CIS benchmark for supply chain, and I can give some more examples, but the essence of these examples is, let's make sure that no single developer can push code directly to production. Like, that is gradually becoming a standard. This is something that organizations are expected to prove that they're doing for them to be able to do business. This has been appended to a very long list of things you need to prove in order to create a competitive advantage for you and to be able to sell your product. You have to be able to prove that you're doing security, and this is one more thing that you need to be able to prove. And the focus is gradually shifting to those places of, making sure that you're governing your supply chain, making sure that you have strong controls as part of your software delivery process or as part of your software composition process. And I think I still don't have a definitive answer on what exactly that needs to look like. But I also think that whatever it needs to look like, it needs to be built gradually. Like, the industry is not there yet as far as having a full understanding of what exactly it is that organizations need to do, because it takes a year or two or three to evolve there. But like I said, I think
maybe longer.
Well, he just snipped off the question which I was about to ask, but I'm going to ask it anyways. Is like thinking, for example, the White House one, didn't that come out the spring, I think, this year, or the first version?
Yeah. Yeah.
I just, I was going to ask, is with your finger sort of on the pulse of this day after day, are you seeing organizations start to improve this year as a result of that?
Yeah. So obviously a big part of what the product that I'm building, that Cider is building, is focused on that. And a big part of what I'm hearing in discussions with clients and prospects is around those things. Like, this is what we are required to build and develop. And these are the areas where we're required to excel in relation to our competition. So yeah, I definitely see this happening. And like every other domain, there are multiple types of motivation for being secure. One can be, I really care about security and I want to make sure my organization is not secure. The other can be, I have to be aligned with various standards and regulations, and so I'm doing security for the marking a checkbox, and there is various fusions of those two motivations. But whatever the motivation is, organizations are doing this. Like, this has become a big part of the reality of Appsec. This is a big part of where budgets are being directed right now. You can also tell by, like, you can see the shift also when you look at the structure of security organizations. You can see that more and more organizations have manned the position of DevSecOps or SecDevOps, which is a new position. wasn't around like 3, 4, 5 years ago, but right now it is the reality that almost every organization above a certain amount of developers has this position. So the investment is there, the attention is there, and yeah, I think it's very much thanks to all these new regulations and standards. And also thanks, or not thanks, but as a result of the attackers of the world, which are proving again and again and again and again that today it is very easy to abuse the security posture of the engineering ecosystem. It's very easy to get very far in the organization if you have the permissions of a developer, or if you have the ability to execute malicious code in one of the pipelines. So hopefully this is not a situation that will last for too long.
We'll keep our fingers crossed on that. Yeah, sort of along with many things in the AppSec world. You're describing like the push towards organizations adopting tools, and it sounds like clearly, Cider identified a problem, building up tooling to help solve this. But there's also, just looking at the top 10, there's, ungoverned usage of third-party services. So there's governance aspects here. And clearly there are organizational aspects to make a tool successful. You're talking about DevSecOps or SecDevOps, whatever order we want to put that engineering of application security and code into here. So what are either some suggestions or pointers you would give to organizations to be able to adopt this successfully, to shift that type of culture? Or obviously, is there some sort of thing that they should avoid that is the wrong way to go about doing this?
Yeah. So this is an interesting question. We had been invited to speak at RSA about the top 10. And the format of talks at RSA, you have to provide like a set of action items at the end of the talk.
Learn.
And for us, the main action item, because obviously you can't just take the top 10 and implement it in your organization. It's going to take a long time. But the journey towards CI/CD security, towards providing a security umbrella over the engineering ecosystem, begins with visibility. It's very hard today to know without technology what does the engineering ecosystem look like under the hood. It used to be the case where, applications were developed waterfall with, one or two big monolithic applications, everything in Java or .NET, not too many dependencies, no infrastructure as code, nothing changing too rapidly. And so it would be the case that you could have an Excel spreadsheet depicting, what technologies the engineers are using. You update it once every 6 months. You have a coffee with the engineering manager, and that's it. You're good. You know what you need to protect. And today, the reality is very, very far from that. It is changing on an hourly basis. So you have to know what you're protecting. And it's too often the case that AppSec is being built top-down rather than bottom-up, meaning you purchase a technology, purchase a solution, and then you attempt to retrofit it to your stack, rather than understanding what your stack looks like, what your engineers are doing, what are the technical characteristics of your ecosystem, and then build your controls and measures accordingly. So for me, the main takeaway is before you secure your engineering ecosystem, create the measures and the controls that will allow you to understand what it is you're securing, what the engineers are doing, what the engineering ecosystem looks like under the hood, and then build your security accordingly. But visibility is the base layer, in my view, for every single organization, no matter the size, for building good application CI/CD security.
Yeah, I guess that goes back to that principle of easy to say, hard to do, of just asset inventory, application inventory, and what's your attack surface? What am I trying to protect? It makes a lot of sense. And I think, too, it sounds like I want to pick apart the you in the statements of what are you protecting or what are you thinking of, in the sense of how much of that have you seen been like a bespoke sec DevOps or DevSecOps team, like a role that's dedicated to this type of concern versus this is just the shift left, I will say in my scare quotes, of responsibilities just of developers in general. And how maybe another way of asking this question, how much do you see the AppSec team as engineering team or a governance team? And does that influence, the any approaches here or considerations?
Yeah, I think the term shift left means different things to different people. For me, it means that it is not security alone that assumes responsibility and ownership over, in this case, securing the development processes. For me, shift left is that the engineers themselves, the DevOps, the developers, wake up in the morning and think about security and not have it be piled up onto them by security without having the motivation to deal with this or to address this. And I think to your point, to your question, Gartner released their hype cycle for application security in July, and they released the hype cycle for DevOps simultaneously. And both hype cycles had a category called securing development environments, which is pretty much aligned with the top 10 framework. It is securing the engineering ecosystem from the perspective of the posture of the systems and processes in CI/CD. And the fact that this category exists both in the DevOps hype cycle and in the Appsec hype cycle is for me one more testament to the fact that we are seeing a shift of ownership and responsibility towards the engineers. If DevOps have the motivation to use and buy these solutions and consume it as part of their day-to-day, it means that, we are headed in the right direction, and I definitely do see it happening. For Cider, a lot of times, the persona on the other side that we engage with is DevOps, DevSecOps, someone who's a member of the engineering group and not the security group. So, again, I think we're headed in a very good direction.
And I think, I'm pull in real quick as we get towards the end here. You do have the CI/CD GOAT, which is a nice complement to the top 10 list. So rather than just read yet another web page, people can actually learn. And I think there's many good benefits of that. People learn in different ways. Maybe tell us a little bit about the CI/CD GOAT, or just some, how it's useful to developers, or, how or why someone should get started with that.
Yeah, so the CI/CD GOAT was built a few months after the top 10 framework. And I think it complements the top 10 framework because if you are passionate or interested in CI/CD security, the first thing you want to do is understand the theory. Understand what are the risks that you need to be mindful of. What are the types of questions that you need to ask yourself. But if you really want to take the next step and become good at CI/CD security, you cannot be reliant on theory alone, and this is not something that's unique to CI/CD. This is something that is relevant for any security domain out there. You learn the theory, then you practice it hands-on, and then once you hack these systems, you exploit these risks by yourselves, and then you fix them, and you see the effects of that fix, and you see that you can no longer hack the systems that you just hacked 5 minutes ago. Then you become very good at building effective security programs, making sure that you're putting the right emphasis in the right places. And so the GOAT is doing just that. It is the practical mirror of the top 10. It has 10 challenges. It is an environment that you can install locally on your machine containing a source control system. Jenkins, Giti is the source control. Jenkins is the CI. It has a controller and an agent, and it has something that simulates a production environment in AWS, all running locally on your machine. And then there are 10 challenges that you have to carry out at varying levels of complexity, which exploit different types of risks in the top 10. It has been a success in relation to the fact that a lot of people adopted it and started solving these challenges and giving us feedback, and actually we're releasing a new challenge in the upcoming days. And you know, a lot of people in the industry are excited about this and are contributing to it. And so we expect this to grow and evolve. And this has been really helpful to many, not just AppSec practitioners, but like you said, also red teamers, engineers, in getting better familiarity with hands-on familiarity with this new threat risk landscape, and ultimately implementing controls in a much more effective way based on their experiences solving these challenges. And of course, I assume, and I invite anyone who's listening to this to try out the Cid Go, and of course contribute to it. Give us your ideas if this is something that you're interested in. Or I assume we'll have the link to the goat somewhere appended to the podcast.
Yes. Indeed, we do. And I think, yeah, just to reinforce what you're saying there at the end, it's a great educational tool, especially, a CI/CD pipeline is pretty complex. So to get it into essentially a single download that you can install and run off your own system, that's a feat right there, let alone being able to look at all of the security misconfigurations or problems that can come out of it. So Daniel, as some parting words, are there some recommendations, suggestions that you would throw out to the world there so that we can continue this forward optimism? So maybe this 1 to 3 years, our CI/CD systems and pipelines will be, predominantly secure?
Read the top 10, practice the CI/CD goat, and yeah, frankly, I think that we're seeing more and more and more smart people and influential people that are becoming passionate about CI/CD security and creating amazing materials and resources and technologies to address these risks. Obviously, Cider is just a sample of this trend, and there are many more. You mentioned the SALSA framework, the CIS benchmark for supply chain, and there are many others. But those will probably be a very good place to begin.
Yes, well, you've been a very smart guest, and hope to see that top 10 CI/CD list be influential, because it is a very nice read through, I have to say. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for those resources, Daniel.
For having me. Yeah, thank you very much.
Also want to say thank you to John for joining us. Thank you to all of our listeners. We're going to take a quick break now and return with news of the week.